Hello, everyone. How are you all doing?
Great.
Are you all having a great, bewilderingly large conference here? I saw a fridge chasing somebody around a moment ago, which I think scored about 5 techno-pessimist points to me. I was like, is this really the future, the fridge? So, okay, the evolution of democracy. I think in order to try and understand what's going to happen to democracy next, I want to begin back here with this man. This man is Joseph Licklider, JCR Licklider, or Lick to his friends. And Licklider wrote a memo in 1963, April the 25th, 1963. And the subject of the memo was topics for discussion at the forthcoming meeting. Pretty boring subject for a memo. But the addressees were a bit more interesting. This was a memorandum for the members and affiliates of the Intergalactic Computer Network in 1963. Now, the memo was about an overall enterprise that I think that Licklider himself was at a loss to name. He didn't really have a name for what he wanted this memo to do, or what he wanted to do. But what it really wanted to do was to connect these small number of unbelievably expensive computers that at that point in 1963 existed to each other. Think, he kind of exhorts the kind of readers of this memo, think of how large a network we would have if we connect all these different computers together. We would have at least 4 large computers, perhaps 6 or 8 small computers, and a great assortment of magnetic disk files and other stuff. Think about the resources we can bring to bear at common problems. Now, Licklider worked for ARPA. He worked for the Advanced Research Projects Agency, part of the US Defense Department. And I think that this memo, as much as really anything else, has claimed to being the origin of the internet. But even here, at the very beginning, even here back in 1963, even here where there was no name for the internet, there was no brand for the internet, there wasn't a description for what Licklider and his colleagues wanted to do. Even here, Licklider said this. He says that by connecting computers together, they can help to make decisions in the public interest, but also of the interest in giving the public itself a means to enter into the decision-making process that will shape their future. Now, this is significant, because the origin of the internet was also the origin of another idea as well. And that idea was that if we change the way in which computers connect with one another, we'll change the way in which people will connect to one another. And if we can do that, we can change the way that politics works. So in other words, here at the very origin of the internet was also the origin of digital democracy. It was also the origin of this evolution of democracy, the evolution of society. Well, kind of Licklider's kind of intergalactic computer network has spread further and wider and more profoundly than I think even Licklider himself could possibly have imagined. I mean, we are all now, of course, members of Licklider's intergalactic computer network, and it is incredible. It is incredible how this revolution seems to have been able to reach out of the screen and to touch all of us. Because I think we can all feel this. I think we can all see these huge kind of waves of societal change kind of sweeping over us. We can see that students are studying without picking up a book. We can see that people are best friends without meeting each other in real life. We can see that memes are worth millions of dollars. We can see that the internet, this connected computer idea, is changing who we think we are. It's changing the identities that we hold. It's changing the relationships that we cherish. It's changing the kind of problems that we go out and we can see in society. And it's changing the ways in which we try and solve those problems. It's changing all of these things. So if that's the case then, if we are all now members of, as we are, Licklider's Intergalactic Computing Network, and if it is changing us all in these profound ways, then how is it changing democracy? How is it changing the way in which we actually do politics? How is it changing the way in which we collectively come together and actually make decisions? Well, some things it has already changed, I think. It's changed the art of political campaigning in very loud and very, very quiet ways at exactly the same time. So politicians, sometimes grumbling, sometimes reluctant, sometimes fearful, are all being dragged onto digital spaces. They know now this is a battleground they need to be on, they need to win on. They know that the digital battleground is one which is going to frame elections. They know where that's the electorate is, and so they've joined there in order to go out and make their case. This was 700,000 tweets from MPs and PPCs, prospective parliamentary candidates, at our last election in the UK. That's 700,000 mini press releases. Not always very good press releases. This is from 2015, strong and commanding performance from the PM Tonights of the Conservatives, strong commanding performance of David Cameron, energy passion, strong and commanding performance of David Cameron. So you can see here, this is still political parties trying to control message discipline, always so important for political parties, trying to control the messages which people actually see, even if they make sterile and wooden reading for the rest of us when we come across this stuff. This was during the political debate in 2015. And sometimes political parties kind of get it less right, and politicians kind of become more honest. So these are the favourite swear words from politicians over the general election. The favourite swear words is they kind of sometimes tired, sometimes threadbare from the campaign, kind of began to hit back at a lot of people that were sending abuse to them. This is so typically British, isn't it? Bloody being the favourite swear word that they used. And so politicians are also showing a kind of raw. Kind of like, in a sense, more natural, more truthful side of themselves. I think that is also changing. But then there's also a very quiet side to how we've already seen politics change. So this is the cave. If you go into any mainstream campaign headquarters of any election around the world, you will likely come across something like the cave. It will be a room. It will probably have around a dozen people in it. There'll be a bit more of a Californian accent in that room. There'll be more whooping. There'll be a distinct digital culture. They're usually shut away from the rest of the campaign. And that's where the digital strategists are. That's where they are doing all the analytics. That's where they are doing all the digital messaging. And that comes from Obama's great kind of step forwards in his two elections. Everyone now wants to imitate the cave. And so this is, I think, a reality that political parties have already fallen in love with data. 2008 was the first time we saw social media being used for effective outreach. 2012 was the first time that we saw social media being used for decision-making. And obviously, by Trump's election, we saw kind of digital spending in campaigns actually overtake television and television and radio for the first time. And that was being driven by 5,000 data points at Cambridge Analytica or SCL Elections, the company that were doing a Trump's digital campaign, claimed that they had on every single American voter 5,000 data points. They'd sometimes bought, sometimes collected themselves, that they'd stuck together in order to try and understand who was doing what. It's also changed the nature of the political debate. So this is we created this for the general election. This is the Twitterverse. This is every single tiny account that had anything to do with the political debate online. Each of those tiny dots is a different person, and their location in this Twitterverse is no accident at all, everyone. So if we spoke to each other, if we retweeted or followed each other, we would likely be close. We would likely be saying the same information in this Twitterverse, and if we didn't, we would be further apart. And what this is showing, really, is that information flows are massively partisan online. So you've got that big, kind of bright Labour cluster at the top. This was a party of the digital volunteer as well as the volunteer on the street. You've got I always feel a bit of a weatherman doing this slide. You've got a kind of media belt moving through the middle. You've got a tight, bright, angry UKIP cluster entirely onto itself. So this is making politics more partisan. It's making politics more polarized. It's meaning that people see completely different things, completely different facts, completely different claims to truth within the political debate. A huge source of worry for digital researchers like me. And as people live within these different information universes, if you were there within the UKIP cluster or you were there within the Labour cluster, you would have basically your own worldview reflected back at you in 1,000 different ways. You would have the same messages coming back, the same stats and facts coming back, all basically supporting your own kind of view of the world, all basically agreeing with you. And we know this as researchers. We know that when people, it's called confirmation bias. We know that when people have the same worldview reflected back at them again and again and again and again, one really important thing happens. Firstly, they think that the people that disagree with them are ignorant. And secondly, they think that people that disagree with them are evil. How can they possibly believe something different to me. When all these stats, all these facts, all these stories that I'm hearing, that I'm seeing as I try and learn about social media online are all coming back and supporting my particular point of view. Massively worrying, this kind of central social glue, I think, which has bound political debate together for so long in the digital world is beginning to come apart. So that is all happening. That is all already kind of happened within politics. I think we're already kind of reaping the kind of whirlwind of all of this. But what's going to happen next? And that's obviously really what I'm here to talk to you about. So as kind of society and technology, and especially politics and technology, get wrapped up more and more together, I'm going to try and make 7 predictions for you as to how I see politics changing over the next 10 years. In my eyes, these get from the more obvious to the more out there as we go along. I wonder what you think. 7 predictions. Here we go. Prediction number 1. Political parties are going to get ripped apart. I don't think that political parties are going to be here in anywhere near the strength or importance within 10 years' time. It has never been easier to create a political party from scratch than it is right now. Who recognizes this man? Beppe Grillo. Beppe Grillo was an Italian comedian. Beppe Grillo had no background in politics. And Beppe Grillo was incredibly angry at what he saw to be the inveterate corruption within Italian politics, the same changing of hands between 2 incumbent parties that had gone back as long as anyone can remember, the same complacent, business-as-usual arrogance that he saw within politics within Italy, and he wanted to do something about it. Well, he didn't need to have any contacts within the media industry, a good thing indeed, seeing as his political adversary owned them all. He had the most popular blog in Italy. He didn't need to have big business backing for a political party. He used crowdsourcing. And most important of all, he didn't need to have any kind of party machinery in order to actually effectively fight an election. He used meetup groups. There was a meetup group in London. They sent a Movement of the 5 Stars member back to Italy after the election to actually represent them in Parliament. And in a year, Beppe Grillo went from being an angry comedian to having a party which effectively fought in those elections and which won the senatorial election. Now, whatever you think of Beppe Grillo, whatever you think of the M5S, I mean, many people would say that this was a terrible period within Italian politics, certainly an incredibly divisive one. I think the lesson of Beppe Grillo for us all is that it is now much easier than ever before in order to actually set up a party from scratch. And I think we're going to expect to see many more parties doing exactly like this. Many more parties springing up out of nowhere. En Marche within France is another really good example. And that's just going to happen more and more. It's also never been easier to actually take control of a political party. So these are 3 people who I never thought would ever be the head of a mainstream political party within my lifetime. You have in Corbyn, an exponent of a left-wing version of kind of social democracy, which we haven't seen within the Labour Party in my lifetime. Trump. We've all got our views on Trump. You know Trump. And then Bernie Sanders, a man who, it stands so far to the left of most American politics and most American voters. The fact that he got so far within that presidential campaign is unbelievable. Why? Why are these people becoming increasingly more powerful? Why are we seeing these political figures suddenly spring up out of nowhere with political views which we've never really heard within mainstream politics before? The reason is that the second thing that social media and indeed digital debate is doing is this disintermediation. You've seen disintermediation happen within media, or it's happening within politics as well. So each of these 3 people have used the digital world to bypass the 3 Ps of politics. That is parties, pollsters, and the press. And they've gone straight to the people. That means that they don't need to build up all these networks. They don't need to have these incumbent relationships anymore. And they're using that with great effect to begin to really take control of and grasp politics in ways that we've never seen people like these, never seen voices like these do before. So what does this one mean then? What does prediction number 1 mean? If political parties are decaying, what are we going to see happen? Well, unfortunately, I think that takeaway number 1 is upheaval. We are going to see a huge amount of political upheaval over the next 10 years. I think that the kind of tapestry of political parties and of political identities is going to get a lot more crowded. It's going to be much more of a rainbow than it's going to be blue or red. A good point is that you probably have more choice in elections in the future as to who you actually vote for. But this idea of 2 or 3 mainstream incumbent parties really passing power between them, those days are enormously numbered. Prediction 1. Prediction number 2. Political campaigning is going to become automated. So yes, of course, automation is happening in factories. Automation is happening within our homes. That fridge that was chasing me around slightly earlier, that was somehow automated in order to be able to find me. But political campaigning is going to be automated too. And the reason for that is exampled here. So who's heard of E-Volution 2016? So E-Volution 2016 arrived on Twitter. And it started sending messages to Donald Trump. The socialists ask, what is our program? It's socialist. Our program is to smash the heads of the socialists. And it always used to sign off with a cheery hashtag Make America Great Again. And every day, E-Volution 2016 would tweet at Donald Trump another quote, and then that hashtag. And it tried it again and again. I am making superhuman efforts to educate the people. Hashtag Make America Great Again. And nothing happened until E-Volution 2016 finally, after months of trying, it finally got its reward. It got a retweet from Donald Trump. It is better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep. Now, E-Volution 2016 was a trap. E-Volution 2016 was quoting quotes, yes, but they were all from Benito Mussolini. And then finally, when it got its quote, it's got its retweet for Trump. Trump was hauled onto the networks the next day to explain his views on fascism. But the real point of E-Volution 2016 is that it wasn't a human being. It was a robot. It was just a few lines of automated script, unbelievably easy to produce, tireless, inhumanly loud. E-Volution 2016 didn't need a human being behind it. And this is what we are really going to see happen more in the future. These kind of bot activists, botivists, we could coin that word right now, botivism. They are going to increasingly, I think, be part of the landscape when it comes to political campaigning. They've got some real edges on human campaigners in terms of just how much noise they can produce. So we're going to see political campaigning get a lot more automated. I think we're going to see the art of building these bots become part of the kind of toolkit for political campaigners. So that's prediction number 2. Prediction 3, we are going to see democratic debate militarized. So stagecraft has long been part of statecraft. States have always used dissimulation, misinformation, rumor, propaganda. Go back through the Cold War, go back even longer, go back to 1917. You'll see stagecrafts and theatre being used by states all over the world. But something important has happened within the last 10 years, which is that militaries have defined information as literally another battlefield, literally another theatre of war. So now you've got space, sea, air, ground, and information. They're all theatres of operations which militaries will move within. Now, just to take one example of this, Russia. So Russia had gone through the Arab Spring, it had gone through the colour revolutions, it'd seen NATO enlargement up to its border, it could see that its kind of edifice of power was being chipped away. And there was this big discussion within the Russian military. What on earth do we do about this? How do we kind of achieve our strategic aims, knowing that we can never hope to militarily match the United States? This was a big kind of Cold War kind of identity crisis for the Russian military. Well, the answer was the Gerasimov doctrine. So this was written by the chief of the Russian General Staff, Vitaly Gerasimov, and I mean, don't try and understand that flowchart. The important point of this is that Gerasimov said we can use deception and we can use information warfare, we can use influence operations, we can use sub-military means in order to achieve our ends. And it's not just, I don't think there's just Russia, I think it's states all over the world are doing this. They're seeing psychological warfare, media operations, influence and information operations, warfare, now, all as being more and more important parts of their job. More important, especially as they try and understand how they fight in this new battlefield. Well, of course, all of these things are now moving decisively into the digital world as well. So this is the Internet Research Agency. It had investigative journalists camped outside of it. It's in St. Petersburg, and that is a building full of trolls, salaried trolls. People that are paid a salary to get up, go into that building every day, and create content which is funded by the Russian Kremlin. So this is now a job. They run dozens, hundreds of social media accounts each, and the whole point is to systematically and deliberately try and manipulate the information that people see in key theaters that they want to influence in order to try and achieve political outcomes. Again, I don't think it's necessarily just Russia doing this. I think that lots of countries are. I think that liberal democracies find it more difficult to do this, so I think they're doing much less of it. I think they're more inhibited when it comes to actually the mass manipulation of the press. But the point is that all of this is actually, for a military, unbelievably easy. So this is a mega bot pack. You've got your Google bots, you've got your Facebook bots, you've got Alibaba message bots, Craigslist UA city scrapers. You've got all the things you need to do in order to try and begin to mass manipulate online information platforms. And that costs $3 from a dark market. So easy to do. I mean, compared to a tank, this stuff is really cheap. So what does this mean? What does the kind of... I think we're only waking up to this. I don't think we've actually seriously began to tackle this problem at all. The problem, simply put, is this. The areas which we now will have political debate on and that we'll all use in order to learn about the issues which we care about and then debate with each other as we decide which political direction our country should take is also literally a battleground. It is also literally understood by militaries around the world to be a battleground. I think that is scary. I think that we haven't actually begun to realize how we can protect these areas, but that is definitely a trend that I see going on. And within all of this, I mean, so what? So it's moved from, newspapers to the digital world. Why does this matter? Well, the reason I think it matters most that militaries are now treating the digital world as a theater of war is that I think it allows a new lie to be told. And that is that it's now possible to manipulate a crowd by pretending to be the crowd. You don't just place the story in the newspaper. You actually pretend to be 10,000 people that believe that that story is true. And human beings are unbelievably manipulable to this kind of thing. We tend to follow currents. We tend to believe the same things as the people around us. Well, the people around us can now be as easily kind of either manual or automated presences run by a foreign regime as they can be actual kind of real people, discussants, people we care about. Prediction 4, politics will be Californiized. So if you talk to technologists and you go to Silicon Valley, I did recently, and you kind of talk about government, you talk about politics, they'll use phrases like re-architecting our social algorithms. They see that politics, they see that government, they see that governance, they see the basic way in which we structure and run our democracy. They see that to be a social technology. And in the eyes of many of them, that's a massive problem. Because what is the biggest industry of the world? And what is an industry that has been least disrupted? And what is the industry that most people are most unhappy with? It's their governments. And that is a massive, massive crosshairs on that for lots of technologists. So they've been thinking about, well, OK, so we've got this like 19th century, social technology that no one's really happy with, that doesn't work very well in their eyes. What should we do about this? Well, the answer is obvious to them. The answer is that you create a startup culture for politics. The answer is that you allow entirely new forms of politics to emerge, and then you allow people to pick and choose between them. Well, this is what this island is about. So this is the Seasteading Institute. The Seasteading Institute, they're working on technology to allow entirely new countries to be created. A lot of tech investment and tech billionaire investment especially has gone into this. The technology is strange. It's like floating jerry cans with breakwaters, but it's there. And the idea, I think this is definitely going to happen within the next 5 years, is that we're going to see new kind of land being created, whether in international water or perhaps off the coast of other countries, to allow entirely new political systems to start up from the very beginning. You can't evolve the ones we've already got, they claim. We need to start again. And that means that, there'll be massive experimentation in terms of political systems, not just like us kind of shuffling around the edges, kind of liberal democratic regime 1 or 2. This will be, you could do literally entirely new, unthought of experiments when it comes to how we want our politics to work. That's the idea. Anyway, the Seasteading Institute. So prediction number 4, we'll see a startup sector emerge within politics, as we've seen it emerge within technology. Prediction 5, the nature of democratic power itself is going to change. And now I think we begin to cut into like the most profound changes in which I can see democracy heading in. So this is Audrey Tang. Audrey Tang was a high school dropout. She moved to Silicon Valley, and she retired at the age of 30. She moved back to her native Taiwan and became a civic hacker. And she joined part of the GovZero movement, which was a group of civic hackers active then in Taiwan. And then in 2014, the Sunflower Revolution happened. So it was actually, and these things always are, it was kind of based on a technicality to do with the trade treaty. Opposition people didn't think they'd been consulted enough on a trade treaty. And one thing led to another, and then this is a picture of them occupying basically the parliament within Taiwan. And they set up huge live screens, and they filmed what was going on. The protesters couldn't be forcibly removed, and there was a standoff for weeks between the protesters within the parliament and the government. Well, and then something kind of really significant and kind of exciting happened, which is that at the end of this, Audrey Tang was approached by the government and asked, please help us make sure this never happens again. Please help us speak to people more so that we never have the situation where people are kind of bowling into our parliament and occupying it. And Audrey Tang became the digital minister of Taiwan. A country of 20 million people. This is a pretty significant experiment that Audrey Tang then did. Audrey Tang set up something called V-Taiwan. She set up a kind of partly real, partly digital process which tried to do scaled listening. It tried to ask not just the people within politics, not just the lobbyists, but tens of thousands of people too, what they really thought about laws. And regulations. This is a platform they were using, which essentially was using machine learning to try and establish consensus. So you get all these people to give their views, they answer loads of questions, you begin to try and group them, and then actually gamified people from one group writing an item, they call it, a consensus item, which the other group would also agree with. And through this, they allowed this kind of rolling debate, which was entirely different to Twitter, entirely different to Facebook. None of this brinksmanship. The whole idea was, can we find consensus amongst ourselves? And this thing which is so significant about this kind of undertaking, I think, by Audrey Tang and the department which she set up within the Taiwanese government, is that she held the Taiwanese government to have to reflect in law the consensus items which this process arrived at. So if this process could find consensus, it would become law. Now, from a political kind of theoretical point of view, that is literally a new kind of democracy kind of emerging right in front of our eyes. That is a movement of power out of the government and onto this new process. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this as well. So what does this mean? I think we're going to see the arrival of an entirely new kind of politician, a politician who doesn't just want to change what government does, but wants to change what government is. Wants to make government radically more transparent. I mean, if you talk to Audrey, if you talk to kind of other digital Democrats working on this, they kind of see democracy as like a data problem. They think there's not enough data points. They think that if only we can increase the number of data points that the people have about what's happening in government, and the government has about what people think, and that's what the V-Taiwan process was all about, then we can make democracy far livelier, far more real, far less distant for most people than what it currently is. So I think we're going to see this happening. I mean, we can already see kind of patches of this happening in various other countries as well. Some of it's happening in France and Barcelona. And I think we're going to see many more experiments which actually have to do with moving power out of the central government and onto these strange new digital democratic processes. Prediction number 6. Democracy will be baked into the code. So does anyone recognize this symbol? This was the symbol for the DAO. The DAO stood for the Digital Autonomous Organization. It was the largest crowd-funded project in history. The DAO was an investor vehicle, so people basically tipped money into it, and then the DAO was going to invest in stuff. So far, so conventional. But the point of the DAO was that the whole constitution, the whole way in which this thing was going to actually make decisions about what to invest in, was all baked onto the blockchain. So they used, people have heard of the blockchain. So the blockchain, the thing that Bitcoin is based on, that is now, in the eyes of many technologists, revolutionizing the way the internet can be used. And the whole way in which the DAO worked was that in this code were contracts which had certain conditions, and that the money would be spent according to those contracts, with absolutely no other kind of political process at work. So it didn't have directors, it wasn't a company, it didn't have a kind of voting process outside of this. There was no one in charge. It was completely decentralized. So the whole kind of like political process of decision-making happened within the code itself. It happened within a cryptocurrency, essentially. Now, the DAO actually was a tremendous failure. Somebody hacked it. $150 million got leaked out of it. It got put into a baby DAO. It got really weird. And then they kind of reversed the whole thing and gave everyone back their money. So it didn't work. But what I think it showed is the kind of huge demand that people have for using technology to kind of create entirely new experiments in terms of what organizations really are and what politics really is. So this gets really, really weird when you start to see politics actually within the code itself. My last prediction, and this is like the kind of one that I hope won't happen. With all the others, I can kind of see, I kind of find it both thrilling and scary at the same time. I can see why politics does need to change, and I can see where all these new experiments and stuff which are happening could make politics change in ways which are vastly for the better. Also, of course, I see there are tremendous dangers in this, and that politics isn't like a technology startup, because if you get politics wrong, people start to die. But for each of them, I don't think I have a strong view on whether I want them to happen or not. I think I can see both good or bad things happening. This is the one that I do have a strong view on, my last prediction, and that is politics itself will get less important. Why? Well, actually, we'll go back to the previous slide for a second. There's a number of ways in which I think this is going to happen. Number one is that we have of course, seen the emergence within tech of the largest companies that have ever existed in the world. Monopolistic companies in many ways, ones which have enormous market shares over their particular industry verticals. These kind of ginormous companies have essentially caused more and more activity to become transnational. So whether that's the activity of the press, whether that's the activity of search, these things are now flowing across borders more and more easily. Democracy still is based on territorial units. We've, of course, cut democracy pretty much into different segments around the world, which kind of are responsible for their own territorial little slice of reality. Well, the kind of danger here is that the more and more we see activity becoming digital, the less and less relevant territorial-based things are to the activity that we actually do. So, a great example of this, and one that I've just finished looking at, is crime. So I think we are living through an enforcement crisis right now. Crime flows across borders unbelievably easy. You can be in one country and you can victimize someone in another country, and that is as easy as it has been to victimize anyone anywhere. Cybercrime is easy, it's comfortable, you don't even have to commute, you could do it from your own home. Within the UK, as much crime now happens in the digital world as actually happens in the real world. And we're living through a crisis in law enforcement because all the law enforcement agencies which we currently have do not police the world, of course. They all police small territorial units. And that means that if you're in one country and you victimize someone in another, well, it's very unlikely that law enforcement can actually catch you. This is a huge and scary problem, and it means that the kind of cost and risk of doing cybercrime is basically nil. Well, that is what politics is all about. Politics is basically about drafting laws. As we see kind of cybercrime increasingly being able to bypass and undermine and go round kind of national kind of like law enforcement agencies, well, that just makes the whole thing less relevant. And I'll end on this one. And this is kind of like, in many ways, like maybe the most fundamental challenge that people like me who work in politics are considering when it comes to tech. Politics will never move as quickly as technology. We will never be able to regulate, we'll never be able to make decisions, we'll never be able to make laws as quickly as technology is now moving. And I can't see a way of squaring this circle. I can't see a way in which we can make the kind of squishy, chaotic, sometimes infuriating process of political decision-making actually keep up with technology. And the eyes of technologists, many of them see that technology, that politics is just broken. Politics is for a previous age. So with this, you can see that increasingly our laws are becoming out of date. Increasingly, government is struggling to keep up. Increasingly, politics is struggling to even understand the technology which is coming out, let alone actually be able to know how to kind of like marshal it and regulate it and do all the things we need to actually make it human and to make it something which we actually want to have out in society. And that's a great danger. So I'll end on this before I turn over to questions. All of this is for a book. So all these different stories I've pulled out. I've spent the last kind of seven months on the road, going around the world, speaking to hikikomori in South Korea, people that never leave their homes, they live their entire lives online, to cyber brigands here in Berlin, to hackers in Las Vegas, to Silicon Valley and the tech giants. Basically trying to answer a single question. It's a question I'm still trying to answer. It's a question that I don't have an answer to yet. But it is a question of power. So who is really in control? Who is able to make things happen in society? Who can direct events? Who can influence people? The way I'm trying to understand politics and trying to understand all these different things that I've been speaking about is through this lens of power, trying to understand really like society changing through trying to understand who can make society change. That book, if anyone's interested, is gonna be out probably early in the year. But I would love people's thoughts on it. It's been a scary and sometimes bewildering journey trying to track power down in the digital age. But it's one which I think is unbelievably important for us to be talking about, to actually create a digital world and a digital society which we actually want to live in and which reflects our values as human beings and as political actors as much as the technology itself. Thanks very much for your attention, everyone.